Ladies, tonight I want to talk about a situation many of you will never admit out loud, but you've either lived it, watched someone go through it, or you felt the sting of it in your own heart. Why would a man choose me, even when it looks like his life, his partner, his commitments, his whole world belongs somewhere else? It sounds forbidden, it sounds complicated, and it is. But it's also deeply human, because attraction does not obey logic. Connection does not follow rules. And the heart knows what it knows, long before the mind catches up. But this isn't a speech about being the other woman. This isn't about stealing someone's partner or waiting for someone who can't choose you fully. This is about understanding the truth behind why a man is pulled toward you, even when circumstances say he shouldn't be, and what that means for your self-worth, your standards, and your future power as a woman. So let's go deep. Let's talk psychology. Let's talk emotional intelligence. Let's talk choice and why you, specifically you, stand out in a world where he already seems taken. You awaken a part of him that has been dormant. There comes a moment in a man's life when he realizes that something inside him has gone quiet. Not broken, not damaged, just quiet. A part of him that used to feel alive, playful, inspired, passionate, expressive. A part that once reacted to life with excitement rather than obligation. For years, he may have been moving through routines, responsibilities, commitments, and expectations. On the surface, everything looks fine. He shows up, he handles his duties, he appears steady and reliable. But emotionally, spiritually, internally, he's been asleep at the wheel. And then you walk in. Suddenly, without even trying, you resurrect something in him he didn't know he had lost. You don't awaken him with your beauty alone, though he notices it. You don't awaken him with flirtation, though it affects him. You awaken him because of something far deeper. You remind him of himself, who he used to be, who he still wants to be, who he could be if he stepped out of autopilot and dared to feel again. Your presence sends a shockwave through his emotional system. You trigger parts of his heart and mind that had been collecting dust. The laughter he thought was gone, it returns. The ambition he set aside, it resurfaces. The curiosity he stopped indulging, it reactivates. Around you, he feels younger without being immature, hopeful without being delusional, vulnerable without feeling weak. You are not the distraction. You are the mirror reflecting back the parts of him that he starved for too long. He starts telling you things he never talks about. He gets honest in a way that even surprises him. He leans in closer, not just physically but emotionally. You revive his sense of wonder, his desire to connect, his capacity to feel joy, and he didn't expect it. He didn't plan it. He certainly didn't prepare for it. But there it is, the dormant part of him rising to the surface because you showed up with a warmth and authenticity he hasn't encountered for years. And here's what's even more powerful. You reawaken him simply by being you, not by performing, not by pretending, not by trying to impress him. Your natural energy, your presence, your voice, your softness, your strength, it taps into something real. You are not a replacement for what he has. You are a reminder of what he's missing. But the awakening you bring is not just emotional. It is psychological. You stir the parts of him that crave growth, fulfillment, excitement, and meaning. When you speak, he doesn't just hear words. He feels possibilities. When you smile, he doesn't just see beauty, he senses freedom. When you connect with him, even briefly, he experiences a kind of aliveness that he can't fake in the rest of his life. This is why he feels drawn to you, even if he is bound to someone else. It's not about betrayal. It's not about disloyalty. It's about awakening. You amplify a contrast he can no longer ignore, the difference between living and existing. You highlight the gap between comfort and connection. You expose the truth that his emotional life has been running on low battery for far too long. And you, without forcing anything, plug him back into energy he forgot he was capable of feeling. But this awakening comes with a responsibility, not for him, but for you. Because while you may awaken something powerful in him, that doesn't mean you are responsible for guiding him through it or waiting for him to honor it. You are the catalyst, not the cure. You are the reminder, not the roadmap. The part of him that becomes alive in your presence is not yours to maintain. It is his to act on. If he chooses not to, that doesn't diminish the magic you awakened. It only reveals the limits of his courage. And that is why you must never confuse the power of awakening a man with the duty to fix, rescue, or wait for him. You lit a fire in him he hadn't felt in years, but it is his job to step toward the warmth, not yours to drag him there in awakening him. You also awaken yourself to the truth of what you deserve. You see him, the real him, without the mask. There is a version of every man that the world sees, and then there is the version he hides. The world gets the strong one, the controlled one, the capable one, the one who always knows what he's doing. The world gets the man with the answers, the man with the armor, the man with the practiced smile that convinces everyone he's fine, even on the days he feels completely lost inside. But very few people ever get to see the unfiltered, unedited, unguarded version of him, the version without the mask. And somehow you do. When he looks at you, he doesn't feel like he has to perform. He doesn't feel the pressure to impress you, entertain you, or convince you he's something more than he actually is. With you, authenticity comes naturally. It's not that he tries to be real with you, it's that he can't help being real with you. You create a space where honesty feels safe, where vulnerability feels accepted, where imperfection doesn't feel like a threat. You see past the confidence he shows others, and notice the uncertainty he carries quietly. You see past the jokes he uses to distract the world, and recognize the pain he doesn't talk about. You see past the logic he uses to handle life, and feel the emotions he rarely shares. You don't just listen to what he says, you hear what he means. You don't just observe his actions, you understand his intentions. When he tries to hide, you sense it. When he tries to pretend, you see through it. When he tries to minimize his needs, you catch it immediately. This is not because you are psychic, it's because you are present. Your presence gives him permission to unmask. When he is with you, the pressure to be the man fades, and the desire to simply be a man rises. This is why he feels drawn to you even if he shouldn't. You see a version of him that he has been suppressing for years, and that version of him longs to be acknowledged. He is exhausted from being the dependable one, the responsible one, the consistent one, the emotionally contained one. In your presence, he experiences a kind of freedom he doesn't experience anywhere else, the freedom to be human. You see the cracks he tries to hide, not to judge him, but to understand him. You notice the shifts in his tone, not to correct him, but to connect with him. You catch the sadness behind his eyes, not to expose him, but to make him feel less alone. And in a world where men are often admired for what they do, you appreciate him for who he is. That difference is powerful. That difference is rare. And that difference creates an emotional intimacy that he cannot dismiss, no matter how tied he may be to his current life. But here's the part that matters most. Just because you see him doesn't mean he sees himself. He may not be ready to live as the unmasked version of himself. He may not be ready to communicate at the depth you reach. He may not be ready to let go of the life that requires him to stay guarded, controlled, and emotionally unavailable. He may not be ready to face the parts of himself you bring to the surface, the wounded parts, the insecure parts, the tender parts. And that's where your strength must rise. Because seeing him clearly does not mean you must excuse his confusion. Understanding him deeply does not mean you must shrink your standards. Just because you see the real him doesn't mean you should accept the half version of him that he gives you. You are not meant to be the secret place where he goes to feel understood while he continues living a life that demands he stay hidden. You see him, the real him, without the mask. But that clarity is a gift for you, not a pass for him. You now know what he's capable of emotionally. You know the level of intimacy he can reach. You know the depth he can show. And if he chooses not to step fully into that version of himself, if he chooses fear over growth, if he chooses comfort over connection, if he chooses obligation over authenticity, then you must walk away knowing one truth. You didn't lose him. You simply refused to stay with the version of him that wasn't real. Seeing his truth doesn't bind you to him. It liberates you to choose someone who is ready to live in theirs. You represent growth, not comfort. Every man reaches a point in his life where he falls into patterns that feel safe, predictable, and familiar. These patterns might not fulfill him, but they protect him from disruption. They protect him from uncertainty. They protect him from the discomfort of confronting who he could become versus who he has settled into being. The person he is bound to may represent these patterns, the routines he's used to, the conversations that never stretch him, the emotional dynamics that require nothing more than the bare minimum of his evolution. It's not about love or lack of love. It's about comfort. It's about staying in a life that doesn't challenge him to change. Then you walk into his world and suddenly everything feels different. You represent the unknown. You represent possibility. You represent a future that requires him to grow, not stay the same. You don't accept his excuses. You don't feed his stagnation. You don't let him hide behind his fears. Not because you're demanding, but because your very presence reflects who he could be if he had the courage to outgrow his safe life. With you, he feels inspired, seen, motivated, challenged in the healthiest way. You ask him questions that make him think. You hold him accountable without making him feel judged. You introduce him to conversations that force him to look inward. You tap into dreams he buried. You awaken ambitions he dismissed. You reflect back to him the man he always had the potential to become. The man he secretly wishes he was, but hasn't had the bravery to pursue. And that is exactly why he feels so drawn to you, even if he's tied to someone else. The attraction isn't rooted in lust. It's rooted in evolution. You make him want to level up. You make him want to try harder. You make him want to rebuild himself. Being around you sparks a desire to step out of emotional autopilot and into intentional living. But growth is uncomfortable, and most people, including men, avoid discomfort even when comfort is slowly killing their joy. The life he has aligns with who he was. You align with who he could be. And that difference is powerful, intoxicating, and terrifying all at once. He may feel like he has to think deeper around you. He may feel like he has to show up better around you. He may feel like he has to confront his fears around you. He may feel like he has to break cycles around you. You push him, not forcefully, but naturally, into becoming a more honest, intentional, emotionally aware version of himself. Yet, here lies the conflict. Growth requires risk. Growth requires change. Growth requires letting go of comfort, familiarity, and old identities. And while he may crave the feeling you give him, the feeling of becoming a better man, he may not be ready to face the sacrifices that growth demands. He might stay in the relationship that requires nothing of his transformation, even if it doesn't nourish him. He might hold on to the life that keeps him small because it feels safer than stepping into the unknown future he imagines with you. He may admire the way you elevate him, but fear what it means to rise. And this is where your strength must become sharper than your emotions. You cannot shrink yourself to protect him from the growth he avoids. You cannot dim your influence to make him more comfortable. You cannot lower your standards so he can stay the same man he was before he met you. Your presence challenges him, and that is your gift, not your burden. Some men are ready for the woman who represents growth. Others are intimidated by her. Some step forward with courage. Others retreat into the safety of familiarity. But none of this is a reflection of your worth. Your ability to inspire him, elevate him, and push him toward greatness says nothing negative about you. It simply reveals where he is on his own journey. If he chooses comfort over growth, that is his limitation, not yours. If he chooses to stay bound to a life that asks nothing of him, that is his fear, not your failure. You represent the path of evolution, connection, and expansion. And the man who is ready for that won't hesitate. In the end, your power lies in understanding this. If he isn't willing to grow, he isn't worthy of the future you could create together. You are not meant to fit into his comfort zone. You are meant to inspire him out of it. You bring emotional depth he didn't know he needed. There is a kind of connection that doesn't just touch a man. It transforms him. Most men don't walk around thinking they need emotional depth. They don't wake up craving deep conversations vulnerability, or layers of connection. In fact, many spend years avoiding those very things because they associate depth with exposure, exposure with weakness, and weakness with danger. So they build a life that stays safe, predictable communication, surface-level affection, minimal emotional demands. It works until it doesn't. Because eventually, a man's heart knows what his mind keeps trying to deny. He is starving for something real. And that's where you come in. When you enter his life, you don't just bring attention, attraction, or companionship. You bring emotional depth, a level of presence, warmth, understanding, and connection that he didn't even realize he was missing. You open a doorway inside him to feelings he long ago closed off, feelings he told himself he didn't need, feelings he forgot how to access. With you, conversations don't stay on the surface. You naturally steer into the truth of things. When he talks, you hear between the lines. When he pauses, you sense the meaning behind the silence. When he tries to be strong, you catch the vulnerability he's struggling to hide. When he shares something small, you respond in a way that makes him want to open up more. You ask deeper questions. You create safer spaces. You offer empathy instead of solutions. You listen with intention instead of impatience. You see emotions in him he didn't have words for. Suddenly, he's sharing childhood memories he hasn't thought about in years. He's admitting fears he's pushed down his entire life. He's revealing dreams he buried under responsibility. He's expressing disappointments he never dared articulate. And he isn't doing this because you demand it. He's doing it because being around you makes truth feel lighter than silence. Your emotional intelligence disarms him. Your presence softens him. Your connection expands him. He doesn't feel judged. He doesn't feel like he's failing. He doesn't feel like he has to be perfect. He feels understood, maybe for the first time in a long time. And that is the kind of emotional experience that binds a man to you in ways he cannot explain. This is why he feels torn, conflicted, drawn in your direction, even when his circumstances say he shouldn't be. You offer a kind of emotional fulfillment that no routine, no title, no commitment, and no comfort zone has given him. You are not an escape, you are an awakening. But here's where it gets complicated. Emotional depth feels amazing when it's happening, but it demands responsibility afterward. Because once a man feels seen, heard, and understood at that level, he can't go back to living emotionally shallow without feeling the loss. You have shown him a side of himself he didn't know he needed, and now he must confront it. Some men rise to the challenge. They grow. They evolve. They reshape their lives to match the depth they have discovered. But others panic. They retreat. They push away. They cling to their comfort, even though it no longer satisfies them. Not because you did anything wrong, but because depth requires bravery. Depth requires him to be consistent. Depth requires him to communicate. Depth requires him to confront the truth of his current relationship, his fears, his emotional habits, and his role in his own unhappiness. And not every man is ready for that. So while you bring him emotional nourishment, you cannot allow yourself to become his emotional escape hatch. You cannot allow your depth to become his temporary refuge from a life he refuses to change. You cannot let your heart become a place he visits only when he feels empty somewhere else. Your emotional depth is a gift, but it is not a service. He may not have known he needed depth until he met you. But now that he knows, he must decide whether to rise to it or step aside for someone who will. And if he chooses fear over transformation, comfort over connection, or stagnation over depth, then your job is not to convince him otherwise. Your job is to walk away knowing you did not lose him. He lost the emotional depth he didn't know he needed. Until it was too late, you give him what he cannot give himself. Every person has an emotional blind spot, a place within them they cannot reach alone. For some, it's confidence. For others, it's peace. For many, it's validation, encouragement, inspiration, or the simple feeling of being understood. Men rarely admit these gaps, but they feel them deeply. They live with quiet insecurities, unspoken doubts, and unacknowledged needs that surface only when someone touches them with a different kind of presence. And this is what you do for him. You give him something he has never been able to generate on his own. For years, he may have relied on self-sufficiency. He may have prided himself on being strong, independent, and emotionally contained. He may have convinced himself he doesn't need affection to feel worthy, reassurance to feel secure, softness to feel stable, or connection to feel alive. He might have lived an entire life believing that vulnerability is optional and emotional nourishment is a luxury he can live without. But then you entered his world and immediately disrupted everything he thought he didn't need when he's with you. He feels a kind of emotional alignment he can't manufacture by himself. You offer him things he hasn't learned how to offer himself. Encouragement when he doubts, clarity when he's confused, warmth when he feels cold inside, comfort when he's carrying too much, inspiration when he feels stagnant. You make him feel capable in moments he feels inadequate. You make him feel hopeful in moments he feels stuck. You make him feel grounded in moments he feels overwhelmed. You don't fix his life. You amplify his strength. You don't fill the void. You remind him of what's possible. You don't replace what's missing. You reflect what's within him. And that reflection is powerful because deep down, he loves the man he becomes around you. He likes how he thinks. He likes how he shows up. He likes how he communicates. He likes who he is when he's with you. Your presence pulls out the version of himself he admires but rarely accesses. You awaken confidence he didn't know he had. You support him in ways he has never experienced. You make him feel emotionally enriched. And it creates a bond he cannot easily break, even if he's bound to someone else. But here's the truth that complicates everything. When someone gives you what you can't give yourself, it becomes addictive. Not in a toxic way, in a human way. We all gravitate toward people who activate our best selves. We all feel magnetically drawn toward those who give us emotional experiences we cannot create alone. And he is no different. He doesn't compare you to anyone else because what you bring is incomparable. It's not about looks, status, or competition. It's about how he feels in your presence versus how he feels everywhere else. Yet this is where your power and your challenge comes in. Just because you give him what he cannot give himself does not mean you owe him your emotional labor. It does not mean you should tolerate confusion, mixed signals, or emotional imbalance. It does not mean you should become his therapy, his escape, or his comfort zone while he fails to take responsibility for his own growth. You are not meant to be the emotional substitute he depends on while refusing to evolve. You are not meant to be the temporary healing he seeks while avoiding long-term change. You are not meant to carry the emotional weight he is unwilling to carry himself. Because ultimately, the gift you give him, inspiration, clarity, affirmation, depth, hope, is not yours to maintain for him. It is his to rise into. If he cannot learn to give himself the things you awaken in him, then his attraction to you becomes dependency, not love. And you cannot build a future with a man who depends on you for a strength he refuses to create within himself. Here is the hard truth you must hold tight. If he is drawn to you because of how you make him feel, he must be willing to become the man who can sustain that feeling, with or without you. If he won't step into that version of himself, then your emotional gifts become temporary relief rather than transformational growth. And that is not your purpose. So if he chooses to stay bound to comfort, to fear, to stagnation, let him. You were never meant to be the place he visits to feel alive. You were meant to be the woman who inspires him to choose the life and the love he's been avoiding. If he cannot give himself what you unlock in him, the right man will, and he won't hesitate to offer it to you in return. He chooses you because you reflect the relationship he wishes he had. There comes a moment in a man's life when he stops looking at what he has and starts paying attention to what he feels. And that moment becomes the quiet turning point. The moment he begins comparing the life he is living to the life he could be living. When he chooses you, even if he is bound to someone else, it's rarely because you are better. It's because you show him a different kind of connection. One he didn't even realize he'd been starving for until you came along and held up the mirror to his emotional truth. You become the reflection of the relationship he wishes existed in his current world. Not the fantasy, but the version of love he always hoped would one day be possible. A connection where he feels alive instead of numb, understood instead of tolerated, grounded instead of lost. You don't force him to imagine a new life. You simply make him remember what healthy, passionate, emotionally aligned connection looks like. Most people stay in relationships out of habit, not happiness. They stay because the bills are shared, because the families know each other, because the routine is built, because comfort is easier than change. But comfort doesn't mean fulfillment, and fulfillment doesn't come from convenience. It comes from resonance, and that's what you bring. You stir something in him that challenges the illusion he's been living. You remind him that love is supposed to feel real, not rehearsed. You represent the version of commitment he secretly longed for but never experienced. Love that communicates instead of assuming. Love that listens instead of judging. Love that grows instead of stagnating. Love that feels like partnership, not responsibility. When he talks to you, he doesn't feel like he must manage your perception of him. He feels like he can finally tell the truth about what hurts him, what scares him, what he wants, what he regrets, and what he wishes he could change. When a man feels emotionally safe enough to reveal his truth, he begins to see his current life in contrast. And contrast is powerful. Contrast wakes him up. Contrast exposes the emotional gap between the relationship he has and the relationship he needs. And that's why your presence hits him so deeply. Because you don't just make him feel something different, you make him realize something different. You expose the parts of his relationship that have stopped working. You highlight the conversations that never happen. You reveal the affection that's missing. You illuminate the emotional space he's been pretending doesn't matter. You bring into focus the version of partnership he wished he had the courage to demand earlier. You become the emotional mirror that reflects not just who he is, but who he could be if he chose growth over comfort and truth over convenience. And sometimes that's why he stays connected to you, even while bound elsewhere, not because he wants to betray anyone, but because he finally feels seen, felt, understood, and alive, because he sees a future he didn't know he was allowed to want. But here's the most important truth. You are not the solution to his internal conflict. You are simply the awakening. You are the catalyst that shows him the gap between his reality and his emotional truth. Whether he chooses to close that gap is not your responsibility. His choices, his communication, his courage, that belongs to him. Your presence in his life is not an invitation to wait for him. It is not a promise. It is not a guarantee. It is simply a reflection, a powerful reminder of the relationship he wishes he had. And that reflection is meaningful, but it is not your burden. At the end of the day, the reason he chooses you emotionally is simple. You reflect the love he has always desired but never demanded for himself. You light up the blueprint of the relationship he thought he could live without. And even if he is bound to someone else, he finds himself drawn to you because you represent a deeper, more authentic, more aligned version of connection. One he cannot unsee once he has felt it. You show him what's possible. You reveal what's missing. You remind him of what love is supposed to feel like. But remember, you are the reflection, not the replacement. His growth, his decisions, and his truth are his own to confront. And your power lies not in saving him, but in awakening him. At the end of all of this, I want you to understand one thing with absolute clarity. His attraction to you, his connection to you, and his emotional pull toward you are not about you being better than someone else. They are about you awakening parts of him he has ignored for far too long. You didn't enter his life to compete. You didn't show up to replace anyone. And you were never meant to carry the weight of his choices. Your presence simply illuminated truths he had buried. You reminded him of emotions he stopped honoring. You reflected the kind of relationship he always wanted, but never experienced. And that was powerful. But it was not your responsibility to fix, repair, rescue, or wait for him to choose the life he truly wants. Because here's the honest truth. A man who is emotionally drawn to you while bound somewhere else is a man who is living a conflict he must resolve on his own. You may have awakened him, inspired him, challenged him, or lifted him, but you cannot live for him. You cannot choose for him. And you cannot sacrifice your peace waiting for someone who hasn't yet chosen their own truth. Your power is not in being the woman he escapes to, but in being the woman who reminds him of what real connection feels like. Your gift is not in filling the gaps in his life, but in showing him a life where those gaps are no longer acceptable. If he grows, if he confronts his reality, if he chooses authenticity, that's on him. But your job is to stand tall in your worth, grounded in your value, and clear on what you deserve. Because the right man doesn't choose you while he is bound elsewhere. The right man chooses you when he is free, inside